Track 15.
Perhaps a year ago, that question would have been considered redundant by many economists. The business cycle has ended. We now have nice economic growth, consistent economic growth, and the business cycle has ended and inflation has ended. Actually, the reality is that inflation is still on the horizon and the potential of a downturn in the economy. I tend to think about the major components of aggregate demand and how that drives economic growth. Boom. Economic growth. Booms particularly driven by consumption, and consumption particularly driven when people have positive expectations, their assets are increasing.
Track 15.
Driven when people have consumption, and consumption particularly economic growth. Booms particularly driven by consumption, and consumption particularly driven when people have positive expectations, their assets are increasing, particularly housing encourages people to spend. Okay, depressions are actually, that process goes into reverse, particularly when credit becomes no longer available, assets tend to decline in value, people tend to start saving more and consume less. I think consumption, particularly for the advanced countries, is the major driver of the business cycle, and the major driver of consumption is the availability of credit and the value of assets, of which houses are the most crucial one. So I tend to think it's very about people spending or not spending.
Track 16.
We still have the business cycle. Okay, we can still have the possible problems of a downturn, which makes the argument for what I think is standard Keynesianism, the way you manipulate budget balances or budget deficits, depending on whether the economy is booming or is in recession. Okay, and the government's golden rule in the UK is consistent with that in general. If the economy is turning down, it may make sense for governments to have budget deficits and to keep expenditure in the economy. That's the Keynesianism argument about ironing out the business cycle, which I think is important because recessions can have very long-term harmful effects.